We talk a lot about approaching your first home with an investor's mindset. But what about other aspects, such as peace of mind, security, and a small environmental footprint? That's what we're covering in this episode, the concept of a home as a place in which we can thrive.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today's episode was prompted by an email we received from listener John Cullen. He says, I quote, "If I have any constructive criticism," cheeky bastard, but anyway, about your content, understanding, of course, that there is a focus on investment success quality, I think that there are more architectural space planning and site permaculture self-sufficiency. These things may be more interesting to many listeners. There are probably a few listeners who want a long-term family home and need to know what to look for to ensure their property delivers for their mind, body and soul. Some of these qualities may become increasingly valuable to future buyers as rising living costs push a lot of the things we take for granted further into the realms of luxury. One day, the most valuable space in your place may need to be green. Now, we have asked a special guest along to guide us in this discussion. We'll introduce him in a moment, but first, Meighan has a special building behind her in the video. What is it?
Well, you know, I like to put something interesting in and topical if I can find something that relates to our guests. And this is one of the projects that our guest is heavily involved in. In fact, he leads the team, and this is Nightingale Housing, which is due for completion in 2023, and it's part of a 4-community precinct being built. So I can't wait. I'm not going to go into it further, but Jeremy might talk to us about that as we introduce him.
So I guess that's a good opportunity, a good segue into introducing our guest. You may have heard of Nightingale Housing, and if you haven't, obviously Jeremy will help us here. We've asked one of the co-founders, Jeremy McLeod, to join us today, but his credentials are that he's also the founding director of Breathe, a studio perceived by their peers as one of Australia's leading sustainable architectural practices, and also head of partnerships at Goodbye Gas. So he's
Hello,
big,
hello, Jeremy.
big on sustainability and helping us here.
Big intro.
Thank you for coming along.
No, thanks heaps for having me. Thanks Meighan, thanks Veronica, and thanks for taking the time to kind of, talk to a generation about how to get into housing. And thanks for talking to,
Good old you.
about sustainability.
Yeah, you know, as Veronica said, you continue to make a significant contribution to the future of sustainability. So it's not just about what we're doing now, but what we need to plan for to do into the future. Your carbon neutral and affordable housing, putting those things together is pretty hard, I would imagine.
It's actually, there's two parts to carbon neutrality. And my most recent role at Goodbye Gas is really about, a small startup that is trying to help electrify the nation. So it's about, home electrification and doing it really easy. So helping people do that incredibly easily. So if you think about the built environment being, sorry, Veronica, can I just jump straight in?
Go straight in.
I'm sorry. So much we want to ask, and there's so much you've got to offer.
Before you
So,
do though, I mean, Jeremy, I've interviewed Jeremy on The Elephant in the Room. It's hilarious. You so basically let him go and we won't have to say a thing. Megan and I will not have to say a thing for the rest of the interview. But
Which
the
is
one
hard.
thing is
Let's just admit that's hard.
it is. It is hard for us, but it's pulling together. The reason Jeremy's such a great guest to have and why, we got to let him talk in a minute is because what he's doing is pulling in, like as Megan alluded to there, we're talking about affordability, helping people get into home ownership. That's one aspect of this. We're also talking about sustainability and creating good environments for ourselves and places in which we can really just exist in a beautiful way, right? But there's also this idea about our place in the planet and what impact we're having on in the greater scheme of things. And whilst Megan and I do bang on a lot about investment fundamentals when you're buying your first home, because financially you've got to make good decisions early on. That's what sets you up for the future. I think where we get to with this conversation is that these are not mutually exclusive concepts. And I think I love this letter from John to prompt us to have this interview or this conversation. And so now I'm just going to hand it over to you, Jeremy, and we might not say another word. Go.
No, I'm sure there's going to be a great conversation, but beautiful introduction, Veronica. That's absolutely right. And if you think about Nightingale Housing as an organisation, it's triple bottom line housing. So it's got to be sustainable. It's got to be about community for the people that live there and how it fits into the existing community, because you don't want something that kind of, creates a wedge between the residents and community from day one. But thirdly, it has to be financially sustainable. And, what does that look like? And importantly, the way that we view that is through the lifetime of the mortgage. So it's not just about the day one purchase price. It's also about how much it costs to live in that dwelling across the lifetime of your mortgage. So yeah, I agree totally. If it doesn't work financially, it's not going to work, right?
I find that really interesting. Sorry, I know I was meant to be quiet, but my brain just keeps going, what?
No, you're not, Veronica. You're not.
But what I find really interesting is back in the 90s, back when I was working for one of the big 5 accounting firms, there was the triple bottom line accounting sort of movement, which brought sustainability more from an environmental awareness, I think, point of view when that was first introduced back in the 90s. And here we are, that has actually translated into the housing environment, just not a corporate environment, but into the housing environment. I love that. I love that that's come across into where we actually live.
Yeah, and I think that, like with Nightingale Housing, it's been a very, very interesting journey to go on that, to try to achieve that. And then what I was going to say before about Goodbye Gas was that, to John's question, not everyone wants to live in an apartment in Marrickville or in Brunswick, and some people want to live in existing houses. And Goodbye Gas is about electrification. And so, how do everyday Australians living in freestanding houses, how do they make choices to be sustainable? And so, we can all do that through all of our decisions, from who we bank with, and which banks lend to do they lend to fossil fuel projects? And you can go to Market Forces and look at their website to tell you, which banks are lending and which banks are divesting. And you can make really important choices there. Where do you put your superannuation? And so again, you can look at superannuation, companies like Future Super or Australian Ethical that, refuse to invest in fossil fuels.
Something we don't all think about, is it? Because we're not directly investing our superannuation funds. We're relying on the fund managers to do that. But we can have an impact by making decisions.
I mean, the fascinating thing is I used to be a card-carrying vegan, wouldn't accept a takeaway coffee cup, would never accept a plastic bag. And so I was, I guess I was so extreme in my views, or I was definitely so left in what I did. It seemed like an exclusive club. And I think that, my journey through Nightingale has been that if we're going to win in this race to kind of stop, our global temperatures rising beyond 1.5 degrees, we need everyone to play, right? And we need everyone to have the ability to win, and we need sustainability to be mainstream. And what's the biggest issues of our day? And that's carbon. And so I've stopped focusing on every little thing, and instead I've started to focus on what are the big things that we can all win on. And so, yeah, like your choice of where your money sits in superannuation is actually much more important than what you eat.
Wow.
You know, it's actually much, much more important than whether you're driving an EV or four-wheel drive. So think about the quantum of money and how that's invested. So that's incredibly important. It's also really easy for anyone to make that change.
Well, you're talking leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Veronica, like massive leverage. And we're seeing, superannuation companies, a lot of them all divesting from fossil fuels now, and deciding to invest in things like affordable housing, so, like wind farms, solar, storage, so it's very, I think that things are looking up, but we've all got a part to play in that. And I think we all need to just kind of, spend 5 minutes online asking ourselves, what do we know what our superannuation company invests in?
It could be those little tweaks, can't it? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I love that you said that you were a card-carrying vegan, but through your journey, you found that sometimes it's just doing little things that make a collective difference, as opposed to I've got to be all or nothing.
Well, also everyone hated me, right? So, it's just...
You need to become more likable.
Attract more flies with honey.
One of your
favourite sayings, yeah.
And then I think from a household point of view, if you think about all of the things you can do, low energy light fittings, draft stoppers, new insulation, paint your roof white if you're in a hot suburb, you can do all of those things, or you can get rid of the gas in your house. You replace your gas cooktop with an induction cooktop. Replace your old gas hot water service with a heat pump. And in Victoria, the state government will give you $2,500 to do that because they're desperate to reduce our emissions. And then call your electricity provider and ask for 100% certified green power. So can I take a minute and say that it doesn't matter who you're with, but if everyone listening to this could just pause for 1 minute, call their power provider. And even if you've got gas, don't worry about it. The electricity that you've got, if you switch to 100% green power, that is the market indicator, which tells the generators like AGL and Energy Australia and Origin that have coal and gas infrastructure. It tells them that you don't want to buy that. You want to buy wind and solar and hydro. And it forces them to put more large-scale renewables in the marketplace. So if you want to have a massive impact beyond your diet, beyond your choice of vehicle, straight after you get off the phone from your super company, call your electricity provider and ask for 100% green power, not 100% carbon offset power, not 100% smile power, not 100% whatever it is that they're selling today. 100% certified green power that's independently audited by the government. So that's the homework for everyone. And if you could do that, I would be greatly appreciative of that.
Just a quick question. Is there one source that anybody can go to right, I want to ramp up every decision I make, every little thing I do, I want to make sure it has maximum impact. One source of truth here you can go to and say, right, that's the website I work out which banks are investing in, sustainable. That's the website I work out which future, which superannuation funds have ethical investing or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, is there one source of truth for any of this stuff?
Yeah, but for superannuation funds and banks, I use marketforces.org.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We'll put this in the show notes. We'll put a little download in the show notes.
And then for power suppliers, I use Greenpeace. So Greenpeace have a website which talks to you about the greenest power suppliers in the country. But even if you're with one of the dirty big three, you can still, you can still ask them to provide 100% green power. And I've got to admit that if you think about AGL and the kind of recent movements by impact investors or investor activists like Meighan and Brooks, I think that we're going to see AGL actually pivoting ideally into a renewable future. And so I think that those big three generators are going to be really important for the future of this country because they've got incredible infrastructure. We just need them to shift from fossils into renewables, or shift their board from fossils.
Yeah, these big organisations take a long time to shift. But as you say, it's the consumer that drives the demand, and if the demand is shifted from one place to another, then the board will respond. It just takes that. I guess if I think about things as a consumer, and you may not be able to answer this, and please feel free not to. Is there much of a cost difference if you do go down that path of requesting the certified green?
Yeah, I pay about 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour more for my power using 100% green power. So for context, I was paying 29 cents a kilowatt hour, and now I'm paying whatever that is, 33.5 cents a kilowatt hour for 100% green power. So it's as a percentage, it's not insignificant. But if you're actually thoughtful about how you use your power, and also if you have a look at the Greenpeace website about who are those suppliers providing the 100% green power, you might find a more competitive price, if you move over to, a company like Momentum or something like that.
Okay. So that's some really good ideas for people to take steps immediately. And I guess, we're thinking about our audience as very much, first home buyers. They're looking to make a decision to get into the market for the first time. But as renters, they could potentially make some of these changes. But when they're looking at, when first home buyers are looking at a property, often they're, very limited in terms of budget and have to be, quite tight. What are some of the tips that you could maybe give first home buyers on what to look at when they're looking at a new property? What are some of the aspects that could help them to be both conscious of the environment and look at sustainability, but within the confines of their budget?
Well, yeah, I think you got to work out whether it's a short-term play or a long-term play, but let's assume you're thinking that you're going to be there for a while and that you might at some point be able to, tweak the house or whatever. But, generally, Meighan, the way that I would start, or look, if my daughter's looking for a house, it's on realestate.com on map view, and we look for properties on east-west streets.
To aspect?
that have their backyards facing north. And then once she's identified those in the right price range and the right location for her, then we go back through and we look at the floor plans together and we say, are the living rooms facing, north, or are the bedrooms facing north? And, invariably it's always like the toilets and the laundries facing north. But, you think about, you look at the plan and you say, well,
not
the kitchen
so much
and dining
for
room.
air coming through that toilet window, is there?
No, but
that's what you're looking for, is it? You're looking for natural light and airflow when you're looking at that aspect?
Yeah, correct. So, and the ability to connect a living space to the north. So, so if there's a little toilet or a bathroom on the north, but the dining room and the living room and the kitchen kind of have the ability to easily connect through to the north, then they're the ones that kind of make the short list. Because orientation is just so important. The other thing that we look at, surprisingly, is actually canopy tree cover and what sort of trees are there. So in a suburb like Brunswick, when it's 38 degrees, according to the Bureau of Meteorology, it's 63 degrees on the street here because there's no canopy tree cover. It's really, really hot and fierce. Whereas in Northcote, which is for you Sydney-siders, it's only like 3 kilometres east of here, but it has good canopy tree cover. And the streets, in fact, the entire microclimate in that suburb is 4 degrees cooler.
I have never thought of that. Veronica, have you ever? I look at it from an aesthetic point of view, but I've never thought at it from a cooling point of view on the treescape. Like even if you walk through the botanical gardens and you're walking out in the sun and then you walk into sort of a grove of trees and you can feel the temperature drop. And it's not just the shade, it does feel like you're walking into a different climate.
Well, that's transpiration, Veronica. That's the moisture comes off the back of the leaves, and as the air passes over it, that moisture evaporates just like an evaporative cooler. So it's literally a natural evaporative cooler. So it is literally cooler. And imagine living in the East Coast in Sydney compared to being in the West in Sydney. Like it's in peak summer it's 15 degrees different.
Oh, it's yeah. I remember once driving out my ex-in-laws live out in Kellyville, right? And one day I got in the car, it's 26 degrees in Balmain, and then I got out there, and when I literally looked, I didn't even open the car because I had the air conditioning on, of course, and before I looked at the temperature, it was 36 degrees.
Yeah.
And I opened the door,
10-degree
melted
difference.
out of that car. I mean, it was phenomenal. Yeah.
Like you're in
And
Brisbane, Veronica.
I know. It was like, geez, but
I had trouble
it's funny.
getting Veronica to come to Brisbane because it's so hot.
I am visiting over Easter, but it's had to wait for things to cool down. But the thing is, at my house, for instance, I've got 2 jacarandas, the neighbours' jacarandas, not my jacarandas, but they overhang my house, both of them. And both of those bloody trees are stopping me from getting solar panels. That's so annoying. But it is lovely to have every window I look at my house, there's green. And I'm in a very urban environment. It's a bit like Brunswick. It's Newtown in Sydney. It's amazing how many trees there are here, though, amazingly enough. But so there's good things and bad things. There's pros and cons of having the tree. It's stopping me from getting solar power. But anyway, I wouldn't swap them, even though they're a punish of a tree, jacaranda.
So beautiful in
tiny
November, though, aren't they?
And look, the other thing it is incredible, coming up, like when you fly over and you kind of look down and you see the colour, it's incredible. But I was also going to say that if the trees are deciduous, then you can kind of get the best of both worlds. So that, if you think about a house with some sort of established garden and that has deciduous trees to the north of it or to the west of it, the trees do so much heavy lifting in terms of cooling the house down in summer, but also as they lose their leaves in autumn, it's kind of beautiful. But then in winter, it lets the sun in. So I think don't discount the garden when you're looking at the house, because that mature tree, it might be a pain in autumn, but it might also save you a lot in your heating and cooling.
Such a good point. And this is one thing that really drives me nuts when you see new subdivisions. They take out every tree.
Take everything out.
Yeah.
Oh, God, it's like a moonscape, and I find that shocking. That is allowed for starters. I know it's efficient. I get that, but it's not efficient for the planet, is it?
No, and also I think if you think about, I saw some data a few years ago, and I'm sure you two have got a more intelligent view on this, but it was that if you were buying an apartment or selling an apartment near a park with a park outlook, it didn't matter what the orientation, it added 11% to the sales price or the value of that property. So you could appreciate that, obviously a canopy tree is not going to be the same quantum as a park, but it adds value, perceived or real to that property.
Yep. Well, even if it's perceived, it brings more buyers in, and that's ultimately what ends up with more value. So
and
there's
certainly a north aspect, as you say, whether that aspect is from a freestanding house or a lot of our listeners are looking at apartments, and that orientation of that northeastern sort of aspect where you can get the breezes and the natural light. And as the sun comes more into the northern sky in winter, you get the heating effect of the sun. When it's in the summer sky, it's a little bit behind or on top of the building, you get less of that direct light. So all of these things, I used to, before we had great iPhones, smartphones, all that sort of stuff, I used to walk around with a printout of the sun's trajectory at different parts at times during the year. So you could actually stand in the property and go, all right, well, at this time of year, this is where the sun's going to be. How does that affect, all those sorts of things. And a client could actually kind of go, all right, well, I can see why. Yeah, I can see the sun would come into here in winter, it'd be lovely, but it won't come in here in summer, therefore it won't overheat. And that makes a big difference to your cooling and your heating bills. And your airflow. If you don't have to close your windows and have air conditioning on, then you're saving a lot of electricity, both cost-wise and consumption-wise. So those sorts of things can have a really big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think that Brisbane's an interesting city in that it seems to be
It's a fascinating city, isn't it, Jeremy?
It is. No, I love it. But also it seems like there's a really good built heritage there where people historically used to design for the solar conditions. So you think about the Queenslander, big deep veranda to be able to solve for the sun, elevated to be able to let air move, through and under the building. And even kind of, apartment buildings, or office buildings that were built through the 60s, with, really clear shading, to the glazing, in the north and the west. I do think it might have lost its way. There's a lot of glass towers happening in Brisbane at the moment. So the one thing about a north-facing apartment or unit or flat is to actually have a look at is the glass shaded during peak sun, so during midday or 3 p.m. in summer, and if not, can you shade that glass from the outside? So in newer buildings with owners corporations, if it's just a glass tower, you can't do that. So I wouldn't be buying a north facing or a west facing apartment in a curtain walled glass tower, because I think that
It'll
will
be
just
a hot box.
that'll just be tough work. You're going to be paying for it forever through your energy bills, and and the planet will be paying for it. So if it's an old block of flats with the balcony outside, can you put an external canvas awning on it or something like that? Something cool with some stripes, maybe like lean into the era, and maybe that will solve that for you. But you want to stop the summer sun hitting your north and western windows from the outside. Putting curtains or blinds inside, it's too late.
Still gets the hot air in, doesn't it?
Well, once the UV hits the glass, it converts to infrared. So it's like sitting in a car in summer, like with the so you've got to shade the glass before the sun hits it in summer.
I just want to pick up on that because we do give tips, and certainly in your first home buyer guide, we talk a lot about how to deal with real estate agents, and what they are particularly well versed in doing is overcoming objections. Now, one of the objections that you might, armed with this new knowledge that Jeremy has given us about thinking about how the sun hits glass, if that was something that you mentioned to an agent during an inspection, they may very well respond with, "Oh yeah, but you can just close the curtains and put the air conditioning on." So again, that's their job, to sell the property, to overcome objections, and it's important to have your little radar on when you're talking to an agent to go, "Oh, but hang on, is that how I want to live, or do I actually want to live with my windows and doors open and with natural light and airflow?" So just keep your radar switched on when you're talking to an agent, because they will always help you overcome any objections or anything that you think might be a reason not to buy the property. Stick to your guns there.
Meighan, if you look at that beautiful building behind you, designed by Brief, you'll see that there are awnings which are coming down in the balconies. This is west facing. You'll see that the windows, that's right. And you'll see that the windows have like little shading hoods around the windows. So, again, and you can see the shadow being cast from those. So
and lots of green there to help cool as well.
Yeah, correct.
Aesthetically beautiful, but it has a practicality to it as well.
Yep, sure.
Question on that, actually, because this is, there's like that complex in Sydney, in Central Park, for instance, it's covered in green, and you're probably familiar with it. Jeremy, there's a little tiny row of terraces, there's about 3 of them, I think, in Erskineville, which is a suburb next to where I live in Newtown. And they have completely green roofs. And I look at them and I just think to myself, water. Like I get the idea about having a green roof and green walls and all the rest of it, but I also know the damage that water can do to a building. So how do you sort of get the best of both worlds? How do you make sure, if you're going to put a green roof on or a green wall or whatever, or have, hanging green coming down from a planter box which is really high up, how do you, I know you can probably say, oh, in the waterproofing, but there's obviously, there would have to be something in the design.
Many times.
Yeah, there would have to, because the waterproofing is you will fail. There's got to be something in the design that can mitigate having those, water seep into the building. I know this is sort of probably beyond what we were originally.
No. I think it's really important because obviously when you buy an apartment, you're also buying into part of the owners corporation and the costs of maintenance and operations of the building. So I think firstly it's worth, like One Central Park. It's a beautiful building designed by Jean Nouvel. But the way and the greenery is incredible on that, but it's an expensive system. So, it has water dripping down those stainless steel wires, and there's kind of, drainage trenches all the way down, and there's people have to abseil up and down the building to maintain it. So, so you can't easily get to it to maintain it. The buildings that we work on, we design the greenery to be able to be maintained by the occupant within their balcony. So you can go out and trim that. The other thing is that the type of greenery that we have on buildings, are generally climbers or clingers. So on a concrete or a brick or a masonry building, We use clingers like ficus. You would have seen a lot of that in Brisbane, no doubt, Meighan. But and so ficus just climbs on the building without other infrastructure, and it has a kind of root system, so you don't have to water it up. It just has one planter box that it will grow from. And then if we've got like on the commons where the north face of the building has wisteria growing up it to shade the building, we use chains as the kind of growing media for the wisteria there, and then we have planter boxes outside of the building line. So and then they sit over decks. So in the event that the planter boxes should fail or should leak, they're leaking outside the building. So there's greening and there's greening, and then I've seen a lot of, and we do a lot of extensive green roofs as well. And to be totally honest, our approach is just a belt and braces approach. So we have 2 layers of waterproof membranes. We have it flood tested. But to be totally honest, 1 in 3 of our buildings that we hand over have a leak issue, and they're back there digging it up, finding it. They're using detection system to find it. And so thinking through how you can easily use pods and pavers to get to those and fix it. I think that so we use 2 layers of membrane, and we rely a lot on human expertise. But even for us, where we pay a lot of attention to that, it is, it can be, a pain in our ass to kind of, solve for it. And then the other thing about water is that, we use rainwater to water those things. And our view, particularly in a place like, let's say like Brunswick or Marrickville or a very hot place, we think that because of the urban heat island effect, it's actually really critical to actually put green infrastructure in there. So my view is that if we need to use water to cool the city, then, so be it. And ideally that's grey water and recycled water. But I think that we've still got a way to go in Australia, I think, in terms of expertise to kind of, make sure that they don't, that they don't leak.
Certainly a growing trend. And I see some of the even homes that have been designed with rooftop gardens becoming more prevalent now, and largely over balcony areas and garages, which means that if there is any leak or breaching of the waterproofing, then at least it's an external area to a degree. But I think what I'm hearing you say that our listeners can take away is when you're looking at a building that might potentially have some green spaces that have been built into the design, is to just be a little bit careful about where that will leak into if there is a breach of the waterproofing. And as you say, in good design, that would be to an external area like a balcony or over the paving, as we can see with the design behind me if you're watching on YouTube. So I guess just being a little bit switched on for our buyers, and maybe in their inspection checklist, just doing that little bit extra of, okay, if something does breach waterproofing, where is that water going to go, rather than just a flat out, well, don't want to touch it because there might be a problem, but where might it leak to?
And make sure you have a look at the owner's corporation budget. So what's the operational budget in terms of kind of, garden maintenance? What's the maintenance budget like? And that should give you a hint. And also, has the owner's corporation had to spend any money on rectification of leaks? And that will give you an indication, because so has there been no waterproofing issues, or has there been waterproofing issues?
Yep. And you'll find that through the Body Corp Records search or Owners Corporation Records search, Strata report, in New South Wales, or Body Corp Records search in Queensland. So that information is actually able to be researched, but you do have to know to ask for the information.
Now, let's just quickly talk about that urban heat island effect, because this is something we've read about, particularly in Melbourne. There was some shocking data that came out around some suburbs that appear to have like less than 5% tree canopy coverage or something. I just don't even know how you could survive there. But anyway, people obviously do.
Shocking, isn't it?
But this is something to be really aware of.
We're pretty tough down here, Veronica.
Yeah, you guys are tough, man.
You survived a lot of lockdowns. Yeah, strong spines.
I'm just this marshmallow lives in Sydney. But what is interesting to keep an eye out for, and this is particularly because I know a lot of first home buyers will look at new subdivisions, and house and land packages, just to be very aware of this urban heat island effect. So I thought maybe you could talk to that. But also, once they knock all these trees down, you're going to spend a long time waiting for trees to grow. It is a quick thing. So if someone really does want to buy that type of property, I mean, I guess what could they do? But also what to be aware of? And maybe, I don't know, would you ever consider one of your daughters? You got a few daughters, haven't you?
I've got 4, yeah.
Got 4 daughters, right? Would you ever consider encouraging one of your daughters to buy in one of those new subdivisions without a tree inside?
All right, so let's talk about.
I think I know the answer, but anyway,
yeah.
Leading question, Veronica.
Let's zoom out and zoom back in. The urban heat island effect, is a function of when you lose things like canopy tree cover and you replace it with asphalt, with concrete footpaths, with black tiled roofs. All of those surfaces, the concrete, the asphalt, the black tile, when the heat hits them, they're dark colours or they're masonry, and they absorb the heat. And then over time, so over a course of days or weeks, particularly through summer, obviously, they start re-radiating that heat out, even at night time, which is the kind of, it becomes incredibly kind of, unusual. But when you have that heat radiating out from all of those surfaces at the same time as the heat's coming down, you get incredibly hot surfaces on the street, and it's kind of unbearable. And so there's a really easy way to deal with that, which is 1, canopy tree cover, 2, less asphalt and less concrete. And then, so, we're working on a couple of, designs, like we're working on a project in Dalesford at the moment. And that project, we're trying to take, we're creating these pedestrian paths, granitic sand, beautiful walking paths to the front doors of the houses. And then we're relegating the cars around the back. So vehicle access out the back, pedestrians out the front through kind of, beautiful landscape space. And of course, we're saving every tree that's there. And we're designing, the estate around, where the houses are. What can be done about that? Simple things like if you're in the west of Sydney, we shouldn't be putting in black roofs, right? We should be putting in, as we get to hot suburbs, we should be putting in light coloured roofs, and particularly pushing up to Queensland, so the further north we go in this country, the lighter colour our roofs are. The only place that should have black roofs in Australia is probably Hobart, and then if you were thinking about what's the right kind of, so think about it as, you want to absorb heat. Where would that be? Hobart. Where do you want to reflect heat? That's going to be, Brisbane, and in between there should be kind of a stratification of those colours. So there would be an easy way to solve that to some extent. Would I encourage my daughters to live there? Would I think that that's a good outcome? And the answer is no. And that's because, I think that the three of us probably understand kind of broader macroeconomics to some extent, that the cost of living isn't just about the purchase price on day one of a house and land package. So sure, you can buy a house and land package that's, 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, 4 car spaces, at the edges of nowhere for $400,000. Congratulations. You might need to drive an hour and a half every day to get to work and an hour and a half every day to get back. And maybe that's different now because of COVID, but presumably you're still going to need to go to the doctor occasionally. You're still going to need to go to the shops. Your kids are still going to need to go to schools, all of those things that you need to get to. And if you have a family, your partner is going to need a car. So that's 2 cars. The average cost of a car in Australia is over $11,000, to own, operate, insure, maintain. So that's $22,000 a year. What's that look like on a mortgage? And then, the way that you build a big house at the city's edges is to design it cheaply, build it cheaply, and, insulate it cheaply and glaze it cheaply. And so, what do you need in a house to be sustainable or to reduce your operating costs? You need good windows and you need good insulation, and you need good design to consider where does the sun come from and where do the breezes come from. I think the frustrating thing for us as architects looking at a lot of the housing that's done, I don't have an issue with with the idea of, affordable housing being built. What I'm frustrated is that you could build a house that's beautiful, that's twice as good, that's half the size, that's still twice as big as anyone actually needs. Like, we have some of the biggest housing in the world. So, and size matters, right? So, so Veronica, to be honest, no, I would say to my daughter, spend the same amount of money on an apartment or a flat, or a little townhouse or a villa unit closer to the city, close to where your friends are, where your family are, where your school or your education is, where your community is, all the things that you need to access and live your life. Like, why do we want to live in a city? Because cities offer opportunity, and they offer, great things to happen because we're closer together and we connect to each other. I think the problem sometimes in historic estates, and I know that they're trying to get better over time. I know they are getting better over time, but historically there's an incredible disconnect. Everything happens at, 50 kilometers an hour. You drive into your driveway, you drive into your garage, the roller door comes up, the roller door comes down behind you. You walk through your garage, sit down in your lounge, you have a beer, and then if you need something, you go back and you get in your car and you drive back out past your neighbours at 50 kilometres an hour. So
hopefully only after one beer, but yes.
I don't think it's a great place.
And it was a light one.
So, and we've known about this as a planning problem in Australia, since 1965. Robin Boyd wrote The Australian Ugliness, in the 60s.
Oh, really?
So we've known about the problems of sprawl for a long time, and it's been politically expedient to just keep on widening our belts and to provide massive problems. They're always the places that have incredible costs in terms of infrastructure, incredible issues around, like social issues and policing issues, and all of those costs that are essentially borne by the entire country because of bad urban planning.
So interesting. I mean, I grew up in suburbia and I hated it before I even realized there was an alternative. and it, but clearly lots of other people love it because, mind you, it's not one of those, there's trees, and it's obviously it was developed around about this time that that book was written. That would have been around about the subdivision. But the point being that when I go to a school reunion, I'm shocked at the amount of people that actually buy their parents' houses. Like, that's weird. So, but however, I lived at the end of a train line, so there was connection. It wasn't.
I think that's a bit different, right? So you had the ability as a kid or as a teenager to be mobile. I think that for, if you talk to kids of new Australians that have come out here, they've migrated to Australia, they've found their way out to the city's edges, and they sit around their entire life waiting for their parents to be home to drive them somewhere.
Yeah.
Because they can't go anywhere.
Yeah, so I'm not a huge fan of suburbia, but I know a lot of Australians love it. But let's go back to John's email. He did say, talking about permaculture, and that's something that we really haven't discussed yet in this conversation. So do you want to just explain to us what permaculture is? And I guess, is it relevant? How, does it help? And what is it? Does it help? What can we do? Go for it.
Yeah. No, look, yes, it helps. What is it? It's the idea that you could have, essentially, you could do gardening or food production in a closed loop system. So if you think about, if you had a little aquaponics setup where you had some barramundi in there, and then as the barramundi would, leave the excrement in the water, you would use that water to then go and fertilize your lettuce, and your lettuce would come from there. And then you would eat the lettuce, but the leftover lettuce you would throw into your compost and your worm farms. You might have some yabbies in the barramundi. You'd take some of the worms and feed the yabbies, or the compost would then use to grow some grapes, and then you would eat the grapes, and the leftover grape leaves from the vine you would feed to the barramundi. So you could start to see that this thing would be a closed loop system, which is a really, it's a beautiful, elegant diagram, about how each one of us individually could handle our own food needs. And I think I think it's a really beautiful idea. I also think it's, and I'm a very good friend of Joost Bakkers, who did the greenhouse at Fed Square, which was about that. It was a food positive house, right? It generated more food than the two occupants who lived there could actually ever consume. And they were running a restaurant there with food they were growing. It was off the chart. But it takes someone with the tenacity of Joost and Joe Barrett and Matt Stone, who were living in the house, to be able to make that possible. And so I think for a lot of us who have other careers, other lives, kids, a lot of commitments, I think you've really got to want to lean into that idea of permaculture, because it takes time and energy. I think that, again, my view would be that, the lowest barrier for me, I think, to resolve a kind of healthy closed loop food system would, again, to be invest your money with the right superannuation companies that invest in organic farming, that invest in high efficiency greenhouses, that don't waste any water, that do, think about that, think about the fact that we live as a society of 25 million people, and how do we all play to our strengths? And not all of us can be farmers, I don't think. I mean,
I think that's the point, isn't it? Because there's a lot of effort that goes into that. And if you, as you say, if you're working and doing all those things and can't fit another thing in, there is actually other stuff you can do. And it's an awesome point.
So my view would be, for my young architects who are hauling ass, like working really, really hard, trying to establish themselves, trying to save for, trying to save for a house, trying to teach at Melbourne Uni, trying to do all of these things at the same time, really stretch for time, still trying to have good relationships with their family and friends. I would say to them, in fact, I know what most of them do, which is they have their super in the right company, they buy 100% green power, they try to eat a plant-based diet, but they're not idealistic about it. So they'll eat, fish occasionally, they'll eat eggs, they try not to eat heaps of red meat. They'll grow what they can in their house, which might be some herbs, but none of them that I know of have, and these are people that work at Breathe Architecture that are 100% committed to sustainability, but none of these people that have massive impact in our society, as far as I know, have the ability or the time to be able to spend, running a permaculture garden, or they don't have the space in urban Melbourne either. But I think that, if John or other people have the space and they want to do that, I think that's incredible. And I take my hat off to you. Literally, I'll take my hat off to you. But yeah, I think it's not that realistic for most people that live an urban lifestyle.
So it's like a little bit of an indulgence by the sounds of it. because you're sort of checking out, and you've got to be able to afford to check out in a way, because that means we all have limited resource. Time is limited resource, right? Our attention is limited resource.
I don't think it's an indulgence, but I definitely think that it's niche, and I think that I think that's it. I think it's a great aspiration thing to do, but I just don't think we can expect 95% of our population to do that.
So it can't go mainstream.
I don't think so.
Well, when we interviewed you on The Elephant in the Room, one of the questions I asked you was about your developments and could you manufacture all your materials on site? It's a bit the same, isn't it, really? I mean...
It's exactly right.
Yeah. I mean, like there's this professor at New South Wales University, Veena, her first name is, and I think she's Indian and I cannot pronounce her surname, so apologies. But she's brilliant. She's so amazing and inspirational, and she's invented these micro factories. Literally, I was reading this article on the Herald on the weekend where she has spearheaded this new technology where in steel making, replacing coke, I think it is, with basically, because the polymer, I think it's called, anyway, the chemicals that come out of coal can be created through reusing or recycling tires. And now that they're about to commercialize this. And so this has been, I'm like, I find her and everything she works on so inspirational.
Yeah, she's incredible, actually.
Yeah.
Her name's come up a lot since then, Brian, since we talked about her.
Yeah. So she had invented these, it was on the War on Waste show. That's where I sort of came across where these micro factories And so they can manufacture tiles for building and little bits of furniture, all sorts of things. But we talked with Jeremy about would it be really a great idea to have all these little micro factories on site? He's like, well, that's just not realistic. It's just not feasible. Come on, let's get real.
The costs would be astronomical to start with.
Let's get rid of our idealism. Let's be pragmatic.
Well, I
concept,
think, you
though,
know,
and could that be commercialised in some way?
well, I think that what we talked about is the idea of, I think, one of the things that's come from the Industrial Revolution has been the idea of the factory and automation and how do we produce complex things at lower and lower price points. And so if you thought that instead of, manufacturing, a Tesla, for example, on a 5 kilometer long production line with, robotics and a whole bunch of kind of, machines to pull that together, instead, you said, we're going to produce our own Teslas in Wagga Wagga, and we're going to do some in Dubbo and some in Brunswick and some in Marrickville and some in Brisbane. And we're going to get a bunch of people to do that, to try and replicate that. It would be, implausible at best and impossible at worst, I think, and incredibly expensive.
It's a trade-off, isn't it? Because we also talk about things like food miles, and we talk about, so the idea about buying food that's produced in a real, what's 100K radius, I think. Even that could be too much for some people. But permaculture is basically making 100 meters radius or something.
Yeah. So just on the food mile thing, I think that there's, it kills me, the carbon associated with our food, right? Like walnuts or oranges from California in Australia. You got to be kidding me, right? So I think that we can do a lot around our carbon footprints by buying local and buying seasonal, so rather than everything that's stuck in an air-conditioned cool room for 9 months waiting for the next season, or being flown from the other side of the world. So I do think that there's a lot to be...
seasonality. Some of us have stopped thinking about buying food in seasons. We want what we want when we want it, and we'll buy what we have to from wherever.
Yeah. So I think, Veronica, to that point, maybe to John's point about permaculture, the 21st century solution to that, for busy, people trying to get their way into the housing market might be actually just saying, we're gonna try and buy local. We're gonna really focus on what does that say? Is it made in Australia? Does it come from this state? And if it does, I'm gonna try and focus on that and eat more seasonally.
Yeah. I said that's, I've got lots of little things in my life that I've done, which have the no scalability because it's just me doing them. Those sorts of things are part of them. But the scalability, in terms of my choice of energy provider and all those sort of things, exactly what you're talking about. I do that. I have ethical investments that have guidelines around sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. And we can all make those decisions, which are the more scalable decisions. I love the fact that you talk about, when you were young and idealistic, because I think we're all roughly similar age here, that, you were the lefty vegan who was, really obnoxious, very much on your soapbox. I can only imagine. But, as time goes on, we mellow a little bit, but we also get pragmatic about how our actions are going to have a greater impact, I should say, and also how not to alienate people along the way.
Well, I think that that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
I tried to do everything simultaneously, and I can tell you that my life was difficult, and I had to make compromises all the time. And so to expect other people to do that, I think, would be unreasonable. And if the answer to solving for a climate crisis is to do it collectively, then we need everyone to come on a journey with us. And we're much better for everyone to do, one or two big things than to have a handful of, idealists doing everything. It's much more impactful this way. And our big issue at the moment is carbon. And to get to net zero, we have to electrify everything. And that's got to be the bit that we're all focusing on in the next 5 years.
Right. Now, on that note, we would normally wrap up, except that we do have a final question for you. And it's one that if we don't ask, I try to wrap it up. Meighan always says, we got one more question. Do you want to ask it, Meighan?
So, Jeremy, we always like to ask our guests, because this is about informing first home buyers and helping them to sort of think about things that they don't know yet. So we do ask our guests, what is the one thing that you know now that you wish you had known when you were a first home buyer?
I think that the issue for me, and I mean, you're going to laugh at this, Veronica. I mean, as cliche as it sounds, is that in all of my studies of, affordability, and looking at lifetime costs and thinking about lifetime costs of a building and living there, the one thing that I know is that it's location. So in all seriousness, and as much as I'd hate to say it, that if you can find a home in the right place, don't worry if it's chocolate brick or if it's cream brick or if it's ugly. For your first home, that's not it. It's about like what makes a home great. It's about, the community that you create within that house and the community that you create outside of that house. And if you're in the wrong spot, it's just too difficult to do that. And also, I guess my other comment would be around size. So don't be attached to size. People in Tokyo are living in 15 square meters and loving life. People in Hong Kong are living in 22 square meters and loving life. So it's okay to live smaller on your way in, because what we do know is that property in the right location appreciates. Whereas a big fat house, an hour and a half from anywhere, what you might find is that it does the exact opposite.
Man, you could be a buyer's agent with logic like that. That's so true. Thank you so much, Jeremy. A really great chat. We really appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate John for reaching out and giving us some constructive criticism and wanting to add another dimension to some of these conversations. So this is great. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on, Jeremy.
Thanks, Veronica. Thanks, Meighan. Bye.
In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first home buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.